I'm going to go ahead and get started. So again, thank you for joining us and welcome to our presentation, this evening's presentation of Prevention is You, and really having a discussion around how to talk to young people about fentanyl, cannabis, and other substances. And we appreciate you all being here. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of housekeeping. Our conversation will run for about an hour. First, we will get some information from New England HIDA. They've been generous enough to join us. Then we will discuss some of the really the nuts and bolts about prevention and how we can have these conversations with the young people in our lives. And I will be sharing quite a number of resources as well. We will have a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation. So feel free to make use of the chat if something comes up along the way, or you can hold your questions towards the end. I have turned on closed captioning, so for anyone who wants to have that as an additional resource for them, please feel free to check your screen and make sure it's turned on for you, or if you don't want it, you can turn it off. This meeting is being recorded, and we will be sharing all of the resources plus some additional information to everyone who registered. So you'll see a lot on our screen, but don't worry. You'll get access to it after this evening. My name is Deborah Lake. I am the Director of Program Planning and Implementation here at the Governor's Prevention Partnership. My colleague Jessica White will be with me in terms of moderating, and she will be doing our question and answer time. So I wanted you all to know that. And she might be also responding to you in the chat, depending on your questions. And to get us started this evening, I am actually going to pass the baton over to our co-president, Roland Herman.
Well, thanks, Deb. Thanks for getting us started. And want to just thank you and Jessica and the rest of the team at the partnership for bringing us together for this, bringing the community together for this timely conversation about our young people. And so, want to thank all of you for how you support young people all across Connecticut, and for being here this evening, for making that sacrifice to be part of this conversation with us. And so, we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and as adults, we know how it's all impacting us on a daily basis and the work that we do, and even in our personal lives. But we can only imagine the impact that everything that's happening around us is happening on our youth. And in light of the news that we lost a young person last week to fentanyl overdose. And then the following day, we got reports that there was an overdose of THC for students in another community in our state. And so, our young people are struggling right now, and they're very familiar with what's happening to them and how they're being impacted. And so, this time together, we want to just pause for some moments of reflections. One, for the families that have been impacted by just what happened, the students, the schools, the personnel at the teachers, and all those who work with our young people, the friends of the students and those classmates who were impacted by these events, and our entire community as we deal with the challenges and support our youth for the challenges that they're facing. So, we're going to send positive thoughts and energy to our community and to our youth, and so let's continue to encourage one another as we press forward as supporters and champions of young people in our state to create more positive outlets and opportunities. And we don't want to get tired in doing that. So we're here to, again, encourage one another and share ideas, what's working, and how we can connect even closer to our young people. This month is, and as we talk about connection, is National Mentoring Month. And as many of us, we can go back to those stories and think about those adults who were in our lives when we were young, all right? And some of the challenges we were going through as youth, as we were growing up. And we had that adult, whether that was a teacher, whether it was a friend, an aunt, uncle, a pastor, a community leader. And we knew that we could depend on them and count on them. And so youth need us more now than ever. So I want to challenge us today as we leave from this meeting, this gathering, this time that we have with each other, to connect with a young person outside of your immediate circle. And just check in on them and ask them, how are you doing? And take the time to listen to what they have to say. And I guarantee you, you'll have some advice and some insight that you can offer that young person, and they will appreciate that. So let's take the time to connect with youth once we leave this place today. National Mentoring Month, January, as I mentioned, January 27th. I also want to challenge you to, when you think about that adult who was there for you, January 27th is Thank Your Mentor Day. Just send them a thank you for the time that they spent with you, the guidance, the insight, and as you pay it forward, when you connect with that young person, as we leave here, that's outside of your circle. I also want us to think about, you'll get a set of tools and resources that the team has prepared for you to access. Think about ways we can expand opportunities for our youth here in the state. And I want to thank Governor Lamont, who is our co-chair for our organization. He has been at the forefront of mentor recruitment, making sure that we have adults who are connected to young people. He set up the Step Up CT volunteer portal. And if you're interested in becoming a mentor, you can just visit that at bit.ly/mentorct. And you can put your name in there, all your information, and one of our staff will reach out to you right away and get you connected with a local mentoring program in your area. And informal mentoring, it only takes an hour a week to spend with a young person. And now, we've opened it up so that you can meet with your young person virtually. So we can always, continue with those connections. We also want to thank DEMAS, the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, for this opportunity. We do partner with them and having these conversations. So we really appreciate the partnership that we have with them as well. And also to our board members who are with us today. I know Nancy Didia is here, our board. We want to thank them for their leadership and helping us to be able to do this work. They are passionate and committed to the success of our young people, and just want to thank our committed board members as well. And so continue to think about, as we leave here today, you'll have tools, you'll have resources. Think about how you're going to use them and connect with that young person, again, who's outside of your immediate circle, and just check on them. How are you doing? And again, take the time to listen. So thank you all for joining today.
Thank you, Roland. All right, and we are going to lead right into our guest speakers, Anna Gazinski and Bobby Lawler, who are with New England HIDA, and I will let them take it from here.
Thanks, Deb. You can go to the next slide and just leave it there. Evening, everybody. I'm just going to give you guys some updates on kind of the current situation and some of the issues that have occurred in the last couple of months throughout the state. So many of you may have known, Anna and I put out a bulletin in mid-November about the first ever confirmed case of fentanyl in marijuana. It was the first time in the nation there has actually been lab confirmation of marijuana and fentanyl together. And when I say marijuana, I mean plant-based marijuana, not an oil or a dab or, kind of like the bud marijuana that you would think of putting into a blunt or a joint. That occurred in the midst of some narratives we were getting from the Overdose Reporting Directive for the state, the SWORD program, where people were saying that they were overdosing, they were showing opioid symptoms, and they were claiming to only have smoked marijuana. Since that bulletin, we have worked with our federal and state partners to kind of do a deep dive on the situation, do some additional testing. And what we've discovered is that of the cases that were reported into the opioid response directive, including the case where the sample of marijuana came from, most of those people, if not all those people, had a history of opioid use. They had previous opioid overdoses, exposure to multiple substances, or other mitigating factors that would kind of lead you to maybe question the validity of the overdose just being attributed to marijuana. Additionally, the other testing and talking with some scientists, it's more likely that the fentanyl marijuana was an accidental or unintentional contamination. It's the belief based on this investigation and discussing the situation with scientists and chemists that more than likely either the seller of the marijuana or the person purchasing the marijuana, who unfortunately overdosed, probably put the marijuana into a container that had previously contained fentanyl, and there the cross-contamination occurred, which could have led to the overdose. Because on top of that, what we also did is we've had the state forensic lab go back through all their marijuana submissions and for the year and double check their findings to make sure there was no other marijuana samples that contained fentanyl, and there wasn't any besides that one they tested. So, based on all of this, it's our opinion, based on the assistance of all these experts in the investigation, that, like I said, is probably more likely an isolated incident and an unintentional contamination. Now, that doesn't mean that can't happen again and something similar can't happen, but I think it is a relief to know that it's more than likely not a massive issue of fentanyl contaminating the marijuana supply here in Connecticut, because that would pose some really horrible consequences and problems for us as a community. The other issue that I'm going to move on to is vapes. I know lately in the last couple of months, there's been a lot of discussion about vapes. There's been some high profile incidents of kids, especially in high school kids, having some sort of overdose or poisoning episode, and vapes being at the center of it. There's been a lot of unconfirmed rumors that some of those vapes may have contained fentanyl. I have discussed this at length with the state forensic lab, which does all the testing for law enforcement investigations here in Connecticut, and they have not received any vapes that contain fentanyl. Of the vapes they have received, including some from these incidents that have been documented in the news, they either tested positive for nicotine or tested positive for Delta-9 THC. There was one vape that tested positive for Delta-8 THC, and that is something we are seeing as a rising concern nationwide, because Delta-8 THC isn't regulated the way Delta-9 THC is. But with that said, I think, the issue is that these THC, whether we're talking vapes or edibles or some of the dabs and oils, they have a very high concentration of THC in them. And this is leading to some serious consequences for the people using them. So the other thing just on that, we have nationwide seen very isolated incidents of fentanyl in vapes, but it's not something that's been a regular issue. And all of these issues without fail have really turned out to be very isolated and very contained situations where somebody filled an aftermarket vape cartridge with fentanyl and smoked it, or maybe filled 2 or 3 cartridges and gave it to him and his friends, or her and her friends. And it was very isolated to a very few people. And it's not something that is a widespread problem as of right now. With that said, it is possible to put fentanyl in vapes. It's just not a a situation that is really of an issue right now, and doesn't appear to be one that's going to be at the moment. Things could change in the future, but as of right now, everything we're watching and paying attention to, it doesn't seem to be a major issue. Moving on to the Harford school incident. So, like Roland said, very unfortunate incident, horrible, as a matter of fact. The thing I could share with you with that is the issue there with that, what occurred there is usually the fentanyl that we see for street level sale here in Connecticut is about, on the high side, is about 5% fentanyl, meaning 95% of the sample is other stuff, whether it's mannitol or isotol or other cuts or adulterants to just kind of make up the rest of the weight of the sample and make it look like there's a lot. And, you know, at the high side, it's usually more like 1 to 2%, but occasionally we'll get 4 or 5%, but that's on the high side. The stuff at the Harford scene tested as 58% fentanyl, which is a lot of fentanyl. You're also talking about a young person who is obviously opioid naive, and this is the situation that occurred in Harford. There's a lot going on that I really can't get into, but it is an ongoing investigation. Looking at the data and what we know from the investigation, it doesn't seem that this is an issue of there being a widespread 58% fentanyl opioid bags out in the community, based on what we're seeing and what we know, because the overdoses would have spiked like crazy in Harford if this was the case. And it's also not showing what the investigation is showing. It seems unfortunate that this young man got a hold of this stuff, and it's, you know, there's a lot of things, like I said, I can't really get into, but it just seems like a totally unfortunate situation. And due to the high concentration of fentanyl that was in the bag, that seems to be the main issue in that case. The New Haven case with the THC edibles, this is something that's becoming more of a regular incident, not specifically in schools, but among adolescents and teenagers throughout the state. We're seeing it on a semi-regular basis through hospital reporting and overdose reporting of teenage kids coming into ER showing signs of, you know, having ingested too much THC, whether you want to call that a poisoning or an overdose, depending on what, you know, terminology you want to use, but they're showing, you know, they're getting sick to the point of they need to go to the hospital and get some medical attention. The main issue there seems to be with the edibles is the amount of THC in them and the kind of way the packaging of edibles explains the THC levels in there. When you look at a lot of these edibles, and they could be purchased legally in many dispensaries in our neighboring states, they're readily available on the illicit market here in Connecticut, and they resemble normal stuff like THC infused Doritos or chocolate bars, Willy Wonka chocolate bars that have THC in them. And the issue is those kinds of things, if you look at what the servings per packaging is, they're extremely high. And, you know, you look at the packaging and I'm just using this as an example, not as fact, but like if it says it has 10 milligrams of THC in it, that's per serving. But what you don't realize is that there's 10 to 20 servings in that one bag of Doritos or that one candy bar. And the kids most people end up eating the whole bag or the whole candy bar and getting all that THC into their system, along with the delayed kind of way when you eat an edible, the way the THC gets absorbed into the body. It's a little bit of a delayed effect. And a lot of times you don't think it hits you, and then it'll hit you in a delayed manner. And then you've consumed all this THC. And that's where we're sort of seeing these kids get sick. So that's kind of updates on what's been occurring in the last couple of months in the illicit market and some of these high profile cases that have been on the news and caused some concerns. I'm going to hand it over to Anna. We'll be around to the end, so if you have questions, I'll be here at the end to answer them more in depthly if you'd like.
Thanks. We can move to the next slide. So, as Roland and Bobby had said, the situation that happened last week with the young man is unfortunate, and we really want to highlight the importance of prevention on this call, and and look at the root causes when we do look at youth substance use. So from here, we do know research tells us that addiction is a brain disease, and there are various variables when it comes to looking at youth substance abuse. These are kind of the big three. We look at genetics, so accounting for approximately half of an individual's vulnerability. We look at the environment, their social environment, their school, their neighborhood, their home, their friend peer groups, other types of activities that they may be involved in, and then looking at developmental, so the life stages and the brain development. There is no single path to addiction, but we do know that youth, adolescents and youth, they're at the most vulnerable time when it does come to using substances. For every risk factor, you can see on that chart, there is a positive factor. So when we look at prevention science, we really look at the protective factors. We try and strengthen those protective factors because we do know that those are the positive things in a youth's life that are going to almost counterbalance the risk factors that they have. Okay, go to the next one. So looking at prevention science, we say delay, delay, delay. That is our number one sort of, I guess, barrier to or protective factor from developing a substance use disorder. So we do know that the brain does not fully develop until our mid-20s. So really delaying the age of first onset of use is our kind of our number one factor to whether or not someone will develop a substance use disorder. Studies show that if a young person waits until the age of 21 to use a substance, they are 90% less likely to develop a substance use disorder. Whereas if a young person starts drinking at, say, the age of 15 or 14, they are much, much more likely to develop either an alcohol use disorder or another type of substance use disorder. It is also said, research shows that if a young person uses whether alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, or any other substance before the age of 13, they will most likely develop a substance use disorder in the following 7 years. So when you really think about a 13-year-old using, then by 20, they will have developed a substance use disorder if they start that early. So we really like to drive that point home. Delay, delay, delay is really important. The other thing that happens during those teen and adolescent years is the brain development. So we do know that the brain develops from the back to the front. So essentially that frontal cortex is the last to fully develop. And that is really where our judgment and our decision-making skills are kind of created. The brain does go through this process called synaptic pruning. So essentially, by making decisions, by making connections, those synapses and neurons are strengthened. And when we look at a young person, say, a high school student wants to go to a party, they want to have fun, and they drink alcohol, that fun is then associated with alcohol for that developing brain. So essentially, the more they do that, the more they go to a party, want to have fun and drink alcohol, the stronger that connection is going to be in the brain, so that every time the the person wants to have fun, they're going to associate that they need to use alcohol to have that fun. So it's kind of how the brain goes through that connection process and that synaptic pruning. And so that kind of leads to my last point. That is where introducing substances to the brain during that time can really change the way the brain responds to these substances. Next slide. We are going to talk a little bit about fentanyl and marijuana and edibles in the next couple slides. So starting off with fentanyl. When we talk about fentanyl, especially in this presentation, we are solely talking about illicitly manufactured fentanyl. We're not talking about the medical grade or patches. We're really honing in on that synthetic, illicitly made product. We do know that the stuff that is on the illicit market is about 80 to 100 times stronger than morphine, about 50 times stronger than heroin. Currently sold in place of heroin. Really not seeing much of heroin at all in Connecticut. So you're more than likely going to get fentanyl. And we also know that fentanyl is being added to other substances to increase their potency. Increased potency, as Bobby had mentioned in the case with Harford, that 58%, that the higher the potency, the more often they are going to result in an overdose death, let alone overdoses. You know, the higher the potency, the more likely it is to become a fatal. And fentanyl can be injected, snorted, sniffed, smoked, or taken orally. We're kind of going to talk about a little bit about tabulating when it comes to counterfeit pills in a few slides. And for the effects, intense short-term high, feeling that euphoria. We do know that it is a depressant. So essentially that relaxation, that pain relief is what people are searching when they're first using an opioid. And then it does have the ability to really suppress the respiratory system. So that slow respiration and reducing the blood pressure to then cause that sedation and drowsiness where someone would then start to lose consciousness because they would be losing the ability to breathe when they are overdosing. Our lethal doses here, kind of this picture has been around for quite a couple of years. And when we look at heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil, this is kind of the lethal doses that can cause an overdose. So if it is pure heroin, it would take about 30 milligrams. If it's fentanyl, it would take about 3 milligrams. And then carfentanil, we know, is a extremely potent synthetic. It would be about 2 micrograms, and that is equivalent to about 2 grains of salt. So we do know that carfentanil is much more potent than fentanyl. Bobby?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you wanted me to do this.
Yep.
So this is just to show you how some of these things can happen. And when we're talking about like what happened in the Harford school system last week, if you look at the left side of the screen and you have the tablet matrix, that is just additives and binding stuff. And it's kind of inert materials, like sometimes it's lactose, sometimes it's mannitol. The red is the active substance that would be your fentanyl. And then it's just kind of mixed together and, then it's packaged in however they're packaging. Predominantly in Connecticut, we see in the central and western sections of Connecticut, we see wax folds that are usually stamped or unstamped, but mostly wax folds. In the eastern part of Connecticut, we see what we call twist corners, which is basically a Ziploc, the corner of a Ziploc bag, cut off and twisted and tied in a knot. But what this shows you is that if you look at the pills at the bottom, is sometimes when they're bagging up, you get one one baggie or one pill or whatever the delivery device is that has no active substances in it. And as you go along the scale, it gets further and further because fentanyl tends to clump together against the regular other materials. And so when we're talking about something that happened in Harford, the bag that caused the overdose is probably like the fifth pill is a very high concentration of the fentanyl, where some of those other bags may have not have been as high of a concentration of fentanyl in there. So that's kind of the dangers we see with how and why fentanyl causes overdoses, is because each bag contains a totally different amount of fentanyl. And because of the different fentanyl analogs and some of the different polysubstances we're seeing used as adulterants in this illicit supply, there's no kind of quality control, or they haven't learned yet how to properly distribute the fentanyl across each baggie.
And that's really also important when we do talk about counterfeit pills, especially, you know, we do have some data around youth counterfeit pill use in Connecticut when we do student surveys, that even students that kind of seek out a benzodiazepine or an opioid, if they do purchase it and they're not sure where it's coming from, that is the big danger around counterfeit pills, is that tabulating that. You know, it's kind of, again, going off of the DEA's campaign of one pill can kill. And that's sort of the reasoning for it, is because there could be more of the active ingredient than the additives. So just signs of an opioid overdose. If you are not familiar, so somebody is unconscious, they'll have slow or no breathing, labored breathing. Sometimes it's about 10 to 15 breaths per minute, which is very, very low breathing. Choking, gurgling sound. They may sound like they're snoring. Pinpoint pupils, having cold or clammy skin, and they'll have blue lips and blue nails. So kind of thinking about like a kid coming out of a pool when they're cold, is they'll have that purplish lip, and along with the tips of the fingernails. So if you do encounter somebody who may be experiencing an opioid overdose, it's really important to call 911, be as specific to the location as possible. If you do have naloxone or Narcan on hand, administering that, and then also performing rescue breathing or chest compressions. Let you go to the next slide. I know that we had a question in the chat about fentanyl safety and handling. So if you are assisting an overdose victim, it is really important to have personal protective equipment if you are to perform rescue breathing. And one of those reasons is that because if the person does snort or sniff the fentanyl or the substance that they have, it can very well remain on their face. So if you go in to do rescue breathing without protective equipment and you get it on your nose or you get it close to your mouth, you are at risk for also going into an overdose if you ingest the fentanyl. So if you do not have any protective equipment, you can just do chest compressions until EMS arrives. Typically, there's about 10 minutes left of oxygen left in the bloodstream. So when you're doing the chest compressions, you're not trying to break the chest cavity, but you are circulating the oxygen in the blood. So that will continue to get oxygen to the brain and kind of take care of that possible brain damage by lack of oxygen. So you can just stick with that. Washing hands with soap and water immediately after a potential exposure. Again, you do not want to touch your eyes, mouth, and nose after you potentially touched fentanyl. Just again, going back to that, personal ingestion if you do touch your eyes, mouth, or nose. And then it is really important to not use hand sanitizer or bleach solutions. Just using soap and water will clean your contaminated skin. Going off of that, the question out in the chat about handling fentanyl. So it cannot, I don't know if Bobby, you want to explain this better than I do. But essentially just by handling it, fentanyl will not break through the skin to overdose. Again, unless there's a cut or something on your hands where it can get into the bloodstream quicker, it does not break through skin to cause an overdose. I'm saying that.
Yeah. So just to piggyback on what Anna said, so basically, you are not going to overdose from handling fentanyl. But with that said, and this goes for any situation, you just need to use whenever you're rendering aid, you also need to make sure you're safe. So you should use PPE whenever you're rendering aid, not even just because it may be fentanyl, but the person may have other issues which are not good for you to come in contact with, or you may expose yourself to other issues. And even with, in here we have do not touch your eyes, mouth, or nose after touching any surface potentially contaminated. Even that, the issue there is even more the inhalation of the fentanyl rather than, it being absorbed through your mouth or nose. It's, the eyes we know is very quick into the bloodstream whenever you administer anything through the eyes. So that's another reason. And like we said, just, use soap and water because alcohol-based stuff could assist with the absorption of fentanyl into your skin. So and those are all just kind of standard PPE and good decontamination recommendations, no matter what the situation is.
Mm-hmm. So our next kind of substance is marijuana, marijuana oil and wax and dab specifically, because that is what we are seeing when young people are using dab pens or vaping marijuana. They're essentially vaping the oil, which you can see on the right-hand side. And then your wax and dab is kind of a thicker, more of a waxy consistency, as you can see on the left there. And dabbing is more potent than the marijuana oil, just because the concentration of THC is much higher. You need a lot more heat to combust the dab than you do of the marijuana oil. When they are vaping, it's okay. When they're vaping the marijuana oil, it's typically more of a casual use because the concentrations are slightly lower than the dab. But they're both essentially just concentrated THC. Dangers of dabbing, it is a high concentration, so anywhere from 50 to 99% of the THC. There are multiple terms. If you guys are familiar with 420 being kind of the marijuana, day to smoke marijuana, 710 is the day to dab. So that's actually July 10th. It's oil spelled upside down and backwards. That's kind of where they get it from. Other terms, butter, dab, honey, oil, shatter. And again, with that high concentration of THC, it can cause intensified high, anxiety, hallucinations, panic attacks, psychotic breaks, increased heart rate, blood pressure, and then it can cause an overdose. Now, as Bobby had mentioned earlier, it requires seeking some kind of professional medical help, whether it's the emergency room or being transported, as those students had been in the last couple weeks. Now, whenever we talk to parents and youth about overdosing on marijuana, typically, I'm sure some of my prevention professionals have also heard it from youth. You can't do that. It just looks a lot differently. It looks a lot differently than an opioid overdose because the opioid receptors are not being impacted right in our brains. So our opioid receptors in our brains, they really control our breathing. They're the depressant, whereas our cannabinoid receptors do not control that part of our organs. So it does look a lot differently. And then we do know that, especially in young people, these conditions can worsen if they have existing mental health issues. And then the next slide. And then our last piece is marijuana edibles. So here we do have photos of some edibles. In Connecticut, we do not have any stand-up brick and mortars yet for cannabis use. So typically the ones that are photographed are from other states. And then, excuse me, the edibles, they do take a lot longer for it to absorb into the bloodstream, about 1 to 3 hours. So it is different than dabbing and vaping marijuana, where that's a lot more of an instant, versus the edibles that take a lot longer. Also, the THC levels are different, and it's difficult to measure, especially when we don't know the serving size or the proper serving size that's advertised. And then also overdose symptoms from eating marijuana edibles can be more severe than those from smoking or vaping marijuana. Go to the next slide. So the effects are very similar: hallucination, paranoia, panic attacks, psychotic episodes, impaired motor ability. And then again, those overdose symptoms can look a lot more severe than those of smoking marijuana. The vaping and edible use, we have seen increase among students and young people. And we've seen smoking marijuana the traditional route decreasing. And that is from our student surveys, our student surveys that are conducted by the CDC. We're seeing that edibles and vaping marijuana is much more prevalent than the traditional route. And we just kind of wanted to end it, talking tips for parents. We do know that teens whose parents talk to them about the dangers of substance use are 50% less likely to use drugs. We're going to turn it back over to Deb and GPP for the prevention aspect of it. But if there's any other questions, we're here to answer them. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby and Anna. We really appreciate that. And as I mentioned earlier, I will be sharing information from them and their contact information after this presentation. So as Anna just mentioned, we do know that students and young people who learn about the risk of substances at home or from adults who care about them and that they care about are up to 50% less likely to use them. So what does that really mean in our current situation? We're still here. It's 2022, but life is still uncomfortable. It's stressful. There's a lot going on. There's still a lot of grief over, things that aren't normal. So as Roland mentioned, with mentors, social support and connection are key factors for prevention. And so this evening, I'm just going to go through somewhat quickly, some of the basics, which seem very basic, but it's difficult. It can be uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to practice, but talking early and talking often about substance use can be very important. And I don't have a lot of differentiated information this evening, but we have some information on how do you talk to your preschooler? How do you talk to your elementary age child? How do you talk to your middle schooler? How do you talk to your high schooler? The most recent instances involve middle schoolers, and we always want to think that they're too young, but it's never too early to start those easy conversations using teachable moments. But it's important to emphasize the dangers of substance use and how any substance can really have a risk for addiction, and especially combining substances can increase the risk of an overdose. you can ask them, ask them what they think about why do you think someone might use drugs? Why might someone think that they want to drink alcohol? Here on the screen, it talks about some of the information that we've been given, just to experiment, to relieve pain, deal with stress or problems, anxiety, lose weight, have a good time, help them study, those sorts of things. But that's a good question to ask them. What did they think? What did they know? What are they hearing from their friends? It's important to be really explicit and clear about how you feel. They want to know how you feel. What do you think as well? And again, the conversation can take place over time, lots of little tidbits. Use this to teachable moments, watching the news, watching TV, discussing what you've seen in your neighborhood or even what you're doing right now. They want to hear the real you. They want the conversation to be honest, but you can, you can turn little moments. For example, I know one of my colleagues, her young daughter, when she was about 4 or 5, was eating some fruit snacks, and she said, "Mommy, I'm taking my pills." And it's like, wait a minute, like what? And she had seen her grandmother taking pills. And so that was a great moment where she could talk about, oh yeah, your grandmother has medication and this is what it helps her with. But, we don't take medication that doesn't belong to us. It can be simple things like that. Taking time to talk and listen, now is the time to take a couple minutes, intentional minutes, to really ask them what's going on, how do you feel? And also, offer to look things up with them. Oh, you're asking me about a certain thing. Well, I don't know, but let's find out together. It's okay not to know everything. But they also do young people appreciate having good sources like the Surgeon General's office, the CDC, the National Institute of Health. There are other places that you can go to that gives credible information. And ultimately, sometimes people, I've heard from other parents in previous conversations say, well, I don't want to say anything because I know 30, 40 years ago, I smoked some marijuana in college or I drank, but it's really not about you and your past is about them and their future. And as Anna and Bobby were discussing, the THC concentrations nowadays are very different than what was available 30, 40 years ago. Here are just a few ideas. I'm not going to read this slide. We will be sending out some conversation starters, but it can be just as easy of what questions do you have for me? Or what are some alternatives to do with your friends if you're feeling bored or you're not quite sure what to do? And ultimately, I will mention too, asking them if they want to practice saying no, or not saying no, but saying, oh, I really can't, or I have to go help my mom with something. My parents might be really mad at me. I have other things I need to do. That way they can get out of the situation and feel okay about it. But sometimes that takes practice. Again, you can also check in with the other adults in the young person's life, whether you're a mentor, a co-parent, and the aunt or the uncle. You can, just check in and make sure everyone's kind of giving the same messages to the young person that you care about. You might hear something when you ask them, like, what are your friends saying? Or has somebody offered you alcohol or drugs? You might hear something that you don't like, but try to stay calm, take a deep breath yourself, and try to listen and really work together to find solutions. And it's okay to have established rules and clear consequences in your family. And the other thing that we often think about or don't really think about is being honest and recognizing any history of addiction in your family that may pose a greater risk for your children or the young people you love. that can be a really good way to start the conversation as well. I did want to bring up a couple of things, and I see there's lots happening in the chat, so that's great. I did want to emphasize, for in case anyone here doesn't know, that Connecticut does have a Good Samaritan law, which protects anyone who calls 911 and or administers naloxone in an overdose situation. So, you know, sometimes, especially young people, if they're with a group of friends, they might be like, oh, we don't want to call 911 because we'll get in trouble. In Connecticut, if you're calling for emergency medical help, in that moment, they won't get in trouble. And calling for help can really make a big difference. And also the schools are promoting an anonymous call-in line for students that's available 24/7. So anyone can submit secure anonymous safety concerns, or if they're concerned about any of their classmates, they can call the numbers that are here on the screen. And again, we'll follow up with this at the end. So I am going to go through some additional resources. So every part of the state is part of, has a regional behavioral health action organization, an RBHAO, and all of the RBHAOs do offer naloxone training to folks. There are a few up here on the screen. Again, I'll make sure that you have links. Amplify, the RBHAO for the Hartford area, does have a training happening on Monday. But you do need an RSVP by tomorrow. So again, we'll get out all the links and information. There's also some coming up in the New Haven area. The hub does Fairfield County in that area of the state, and then Western Connecticut also has a few coming up in February. And they all also have additional options if you want them to come and do a training for a group virtually, and they are working with the schools, police departments, and communities to make sure that folks are getting trained. Any prescribers, so doctors, APRNs, physician assistants, dentists, have the ability to prescribe naloxone in the state of Connecticut. So you do have access if you think that is something that you could use or a family member could use, or that it would be good for you to have access to. We will be having a similar presentation. Oh, yes, I see that. A lot of the local prevention councils also have naloxone trainings, and so those are city town based, so you can always look up who your local prevention council is and what they might be offering. On Tuesday, we have a similar conversation going on, but in Spanish. So if you have any friends or family or colleagues who would like to participate in that presentation, they would be welcome. We will have Dr. Rocio Chang, who she specializes in trauma in Latino communities, and she'll be able to have a conversation with you as well. And next week, we are having 2 presentations on current trends in substance use, which will be different than this presentation, but you are welcome to attend to learn a little bit more about different things that could be useful for your community or your school or organization. We also have resources at drugfreect.org. They have kits, they have drug disposal boxes and safe storage things available. They have other, information that you could use just to learn about different substances. And so they're a very great resource. You Think You Know, CT.org is a newer resource that has some parent guides. There's some great information around counterfeit pills and other ways to really teach young people, but also yourself, about what is happening. I don't know, Anna, I know you were involved in this. Is there anything else you want to say about You Think You Know?
No.
Okay.
Other than, we're continuously updating the information with some of the stuff that has been going on. So it's definitely, we're keeping up with it.
All right. Thanks.
Resources.
There is a phone app for anyone who's interested. It's sponsored by the Department of Public Health. It's called norasaves.com. If you go to that, you can download the app. There's information about signs of an overdose, how to give naloxone, how to obtain naloxone. It's in English, Spanish, Polish, and Portuguese. So that is a great resource available to folks. 211 is always available, and they do have an area that is specially dedicated to substance use, support, treatment, and recovery supports, those sorts of things. And liveloud.org is a great resource for those living with opioid use disorder and families who are supporting those who have experienced opioid use disorder. And finally, this is the phone number for Connecticut Children's. They are available to assist, a lot of concern around young people and their mental health as well as their physical health has come to the forefront. And so Connecticut Children's is another great resource that's available as people need. And finally, our website. We have some information on how to help young people through current events. So, things that are in the news that might be causing some trauma or concern. We have a guide there. We also have some additional information on all of the resources around opioids, on fentanyl specifically, on cannabis, and then again, some more tips and tricks and conversation starters, some additional conversation starters. So you can always get that as well on our website. And now we are pretty close to 7. I know that we have some questions in the chat, but now is the time. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to put that in the chat. I'm gonna check, or Jessica, if you.
Sure, there were just a few questions and comments that came through. 2 of them are similar. One asking, how should you educate your elementary school and middle school students without scaring them too much? And people are also asking if we have talking points by age that might be available to be sent out to them.
Great, thanks. So for elementary school children, one of the best ways to start is simply by really focusing on medication safety. And, you're often talking to them at that age around, eating your fruits and vegetables and not just candy. So what you put into your body can impact your body. Healthy foods, not healthy foods, or things that have more nutrients to help you grow and be strong. And so, you can kind of have those conversations be linked to making smart decisions about what you put into your body. And you don't have to go any deeper than that necessarily at the really young age. And then, then you can also make sure, I have a 3-year-old and she already understands, like, there is medicine in the house that sometimes the doctor can give her, but it's not something she just has access to, and keeping things up and away is one of the best ways to keep your young children safe. And we will be providing some more information around the different age groups. And we have some of that also in Spanish as well.
I think I would add too, for the middle school age students, the recent situations can kind of prove to us that they're probably not as naive about a lot of the situations as we would like to think that they are. and approaching it with curiosity, asking them what they do know and if they have questions for you about it, instead of thinking that you always have to, start with, don't do that, don't do this type of approach to the conversation. Thanks, Deb. I also want to highlight, go ahead.
Oh, I just, so Giovanna from the Hub, which is in Region 1, said that, just mentioned like certain LPCs like Fairfield Cares do have documents already created on how to talk to kids by age. So there are lots of, resources out there. And it's that idea, a lot of us probably grew up at the time where it was like, just say no. And that really doesn't work in the long run, and it doesn't work for our kids today. And so trying to have that curiosity, showing true curiosity, like Jess said, of what do you already know? What are you saying? What are you hearing? What do you experience every day? And again, really trying to hold that space for them to share with you authentically what they're seeing and doing can really help.
I also wanted to highlight, Daniel had shared a comment that my kids and I have talked out situations, pretty fun. I'm very open and honest with my 2 kids, and I honor their opinion on everything. Takes understanding and respect, and we know our focus is mutual, always about love. I just thought that was really well put. He had a lot of great points on there, and on listening and respecting the views and opinions of your young people and seeing what they have to say about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, one other comment that I wanted to highlight. Someone said that they Googled dabbing and opened a website that asked if they were 21, click yes or no. And then a few seconds, a pop-up came up asking if they wanted to order free samples of CBD or edibles. And it's true, it kind of speaks to the access and the prevalence of how there's a lot of messaging in a lot of areas or places that young people can get substances like this. And highlights the need for parental support and monitoring, right? That you're having those regular conversations about what they're seeing online, in real life, and in person, and aware, and just being involved in it is a really important protective factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I just also wanted to highlight that CBD market. It technically sort of falls under the dietary supplement market, where nothing is regulated, whether it's packaging, marketing. So it's just really important to do research, because we know that you can get CBD for $2 at the gas station, or you can get it for, upwards to $100 at a natural food store. So it's just really important to do your research if that is something that you're looking to purchase, because there's a lot of mismarketing.
There is. Thank you.
We did have a question come in about fentanyl. Someone is asking, how long does fentanyl stay in your system? I know maybe Bobby or Anna are able to speak to that.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not sure. I know it has a very short half-life. It doesn't stay in your system very long. The exact amount of time, I don't know why I want to say 72 hours, but I could be mistaken there. I don't want to give anybody misinformation, but it's very short. It doesn't stay in your system a very long time. But that's something I can double check with. I can send it to Deb, and then she could send out to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And I've seen a couple links in the chat. Thank you all. Those are definitely great resources. And we are an affiliate of the Partnership to End Addiction, formerly the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. They've changed their name a couple of times. And so, yes, the Partnership to End Addiction has a lot of great, articles around how to talk to kids, what to do if you think you're a young person in your life is actually using drugs or having issues with alcohol. SAMHSA also does have a great campaign right now called Talk, They Hear You. So again, that goes back to the fact that they really do, having these conversations can cut the risk in half. And so it's really important. So I'll make sure I send out both the Fair Cares talking tips, along with the other resources that we have. I am going to do a quick Zoom poll. And there's just four quick questions. I'll leave that up for about 30 seconds. But if there's any other questions or comments, please let us know. Otherwise, I do have our information up on the screen. We really appreciate your attendance here this evening. Hopefully, there's been at least one nugget. I learned something. I wasn't aware about the alcohol and how that reacted with fentanyl. And so, hopefully there's at least one thing that helps make you feel a little bit more confident in having a conversation or encouraging others to have these conversations with the young people in their lives. Anna, Bobby, if there's anything else you want to say or share before we say goodnight.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. I'm going to give about a couple more seconds. Thank you all for participating, and I hope you have a good evening.